But how does that dynamic change and evolve as we go from an individual to then working together collectively as a family unit?
I think it's something that a lot of young couples struggle with if you don't come in with the same values and the same money mindset. And very seldom do people do that when they enter a relationship. It would be key to start communicating and talking about those things before you even get married. Whereas I think a lot of couples don't think about that. They might talk about their future plans or having children, but you don't tackle the actual money aspects because often we grow up without talking about finances and about money. So understanding where you come from, what your values are, what your limiting beliefs might be, and maybe recognizing some red flags before you come into that relationship so that you can talk about them and deal with them.
Do you find yourself counting your pennies at the end of every month, despite the fact that you should in theory have a surplus? And yet this money seems to disappear month in and month out, and you just don't know where it goes. Well, if this message has resonated with you, then this episode is going to be for you. Personal finance educator Nikki Sinclair from So Much More is on the show with me today. And using her over a quarter of a century's worth of experience in teaching personal finance skills, we have a fantastic conversation, not limited to, but including the psychology of money, how we bring limiting beliefs and mindsets into a relationship, and how to combat that for a cohesive financial family unit. The importance of budgeting, the average age of a first-time homeowner, how to manage debt, and in what order should we pay debts off. This is a major struggle for middle-class South Africa at the moment. And finally, how much is enough to set you up for the life that you want to live? Please follow Nikki on all her social media handles and get in touch with her for one of her amazing workshops. Her details are attached in the show notes. Please like, share, subscribe, and enjoy. Nikki, welcome to the podcast. Lovely to have you.
Thank you, Clinton. Thanks for having me here.
My absolute pleasure. We're here to talk about money. We're here to talk about personal finance. And it's something that is really at the forefront of the South African consumer's mind at the moment. Middle-class South Africa is feeling the pinch. There's a lot of young families out there, young couples as well, that are trying to navigate their way through the personal finance world and the personal finance space. And it is something that's been a daunting journey for myself, having had to stumble into things and read books and try to educate myself and see what my friends are doing around me and seeing, okay, does that work for them and would that work for me? We spoke off air about things like your relationship with money, which is that wonderful book up there, Psychology of Money. So I'm really excited about the chat that we're going to have today. But can you give me some background as to why you find yourself in the space that you're in at the moment?
Oh, that's an interesting question, Clinton. I think I am not a financial advisor. I have not got any formal finance teaching. My background is in education. But just when we got married, we realized exactly where you are now, that we're just trying to make things work, and we were just on this treadmill, and we thought earning more money would make things better, and then you just get to that point and you never seem to get off this treadmill. So after a couple of years of marriage, both working, realizing that we want to start a family, but how do you ever afford to have children when you can't afford a house and you're just trying to make ends meet? So we did the same thing. We read some books, we did some courses, there were some key things that stood out for us, and we just started putting a few little things in place that 30 years later I can look back and realize, wow, it wasn't that difficult. We really didn't know what we were doing at the time, but we just put a few things in place that put me in a situation that years later, when I lost my husband suddenly, and I had to now say, where am I financially, to say I am okay. I don't have to worry about finances. So I think that was just a passion for me to be able to teach people those simple things that we had learned. And on top of that, I was running a business in the wedding industry when we moved down from Johannesburg, and realized that a lot of small business people do not know how to manage their money. It was in the wedding industry, and people are passionate about photography or about the flowers or about their venue, whatever it is, but no, very few of them had any money sense about how are we going to manage this small business. And then, of course, COVID hits, and people didn't have savings to last a month, let alone the 6 months or the 12 months. So some people were able to pivot, and we talked about pivoting earlier. Some people really struggled, lost cars, had to change their jobs, had to take children out of private schooling, just because of lack of planning. So long story short, I ended up selling my business and coming full-time into financial education, just realizing the need for people to be able to manage their money. And when you look at a few key things, it's not rocket science. It's not a difficult thing to do, but people don't know where to start. I really think people should start this learning at school.
You would think so, hey?
They don't teach it at school, unfortunately. I was fortunate to be involved in teaching a 12-week personal financial course through the banner of the church for about 25 years, and realized the impact that had on people. And so just ended up creating some courses and workshops just to teach the basics of personal finances and the basics of investing, and the basics of how couples manage their finances in a relationship.
Yeah.
So just following my passion.
That's so cool. Similar to me, I'm following my passion through the podcast and having interesting people on the show to chat about different things. You mentioned something there about the individual versus entering into a relationship, and everybody brings their own baggage to a relationship, and that could mean baggage in many ways, but in this instance it also means financial baggage. Maybe not literal debt, maybe it is, maybe it's wealth, but we bring our spending habits, and we bring our own individual relationships that we have with money under the same roof. How does that relationship change, and how should it evolve as an individual then becomes in a shared space with a person once they get married, and now they have to try and coordinate this family structure? Maybe there's a kid on the way. We've got a little toddler. Quick shout out to Gavin, who says, again, I always mention Grayson on every podcast, so there you go. That took about 5 minutes. But how does that dynamic change and evolve as we go from an individual to then working together collectively as a family unit?
I think it's something that a lot of young couples struggle with if you don't come in with the same values and the same money mindset. And very seldom do people do that when they enter a relationship. It would be key to start communicating and talking about those things before you even get married. Whereas I think a lot of couples don't think about that. They might talk about their future plans or having children, but you don't tackle the actual money aspects, because often we grow up without talking about finances and about money. So understanding where you come from, what your values are, what your limiting beliefs might be, and maybe recognizing some red flags before you come into that relationship so that you can talk about them and deal with them. Most of them, I think, can be overcome. You might have grown up believing that rich people are greedy, or money doesn't grow on trees, or money is the root of all evil. And so you have these things which actually push you against money or draw you towards money, or you might have come from a very affluent family, whereas your partner might have come from someone that's more aware of finances. And so you've got to come and meet these type of things. So I think the first thing would be good communication before coming into marriage. But if you are in a marriage or a relationship already and you haven't talked about that, then there's always a good time to start talking about it and realizing the differences in your personalities and where those beliefs come from. Because it's subconscious and we're not aware of them. And there's nothing wrong with having different personalities or different ideas about money, but it's how do we get through that?
Yeah. And the awareness of it, the self-awareness of this is how I've been raised in terms of this is how I view money. Maybe it's a mindset of scarcity. There's only there's not enough to go around for everybody. I think a lot of people can relate to that sort of mindset. Counting your pennies all the time. You can't have this, that's too expensive, you can't have that. Or even when you do get something, you moan about the price and how expensive it is. It's
Absolutely.
all these subconscious reinforcements that happen. So I think that's a very valid point, is the self-awareness of understanding, okay, this is my perspective on money, and my partner, okay, this is my perspective on money. And then, all right, well, how do we make that work? What are some red flags that you alluded to with regards to personal finance or personal finance baggage?
I think just recognizing the differences. If, for example, you have a tendency to give and to help other people, and the partner you are entering into a life relationship for, it's got a very miserly or different mindset, it's a big hurdle to overcome. So something like that, where you want to give and they want to hoard. You need to deal with those things, otherwise it's going to constantly be a conflict. If someone, and very common in a relationship, you've got a spender and a saver, and there's nothing wrong with being the spender or the saver, but how do we work this so that it's not going to be a conflict? And that's why you mentioned earlier that so many marriages end up in divorce over finances, because there's no way of reconciling those differences. So there are little tips and tricks to do that, and to work with that, because you're not going to change your personality. If you've grown up as somebody who's got a giving heart and someone who likes to spend and live today for today and not worry about the future, then you have to come, in line with your partner to say, okay, it's important for you to plan for the future, so how do we do that?
Yeah.
And again, it's communication and just understanding your partner that's important.
So what are some structures and some basic frameworks or guidelines that a couple can put into place to mitigate maybe these polar opposites?
All right, there's a few things that work really well, and once you start talking about finances and realizing, okay, the basis is having a budget, and having a budget for your family, because most people get money in and money goes out. They don't have no idea where the money goes. So it's understanding where is that money going, and then working as a team to do that. And usually you get somebody who's better at finances than others. I married a chartered accountant thinking I never have to deal with money again, and here I am teaching finances because of the importance of it and the impact that it makes. So although I stayed away for it for a long time, until I realized that a budget isn't limiting for me, it's empowering me to be able to tell my money where to go, to know at the end of the month that it hasn't just disappeared, but I know that I allocated so much for saving and for giving and for actually having some fun. And it's okay to have some fun without being guilty because you've allocated that. So it's just telling your money where to go instead of letting money control you. So understanding that as a team, and then if someone is stronger on the financial side, then let them take the lead. But what works quite well is to have a money date. So we recommend that maybe once a month you sit down with your partner and you have a money date. Not in a stressful time, not when you're trying to pay accounts, not when, when you just find a nice, relaxing time. You go out for dinner if it's in your budget, or otherwise make some pizzas at home, open a good bottle of wine if you can do that. And then just once a month, sit down and say, where are we at? What's important for you? Where have we fallen short? If you've got a structure or a plan together to get out of debt, how are we doing on that? So just stay on the same page, because we know that life just goes. And if you just keep on that, you're never going to make any progress. So that money date is a good tool to start off with young couples, just to be on the same page and to have a plan together. Set some common goals, maybe. The other little thing that helps really well is, for example, if you have a saver and a spender. And then instead of having to be accountable for every cent, or having to share, you're not allowed to spend money without me knowing about it, or whatever you have in your relationship, how you've come to deal with it. You don't want to just be going and spending secretly so that your partner doesn't know about it. You want to actually firstly be open about it, but then have a discretionary spending amount. So whether it's 100 Rand or 500 Rand or 5,000 Rand, whatever your budget is. So I like to save and you like to spend, or you like to spend on wine and you like to spend on your hair, or whatever the case might be. You don't want to be so restricted that you become resentful for your partner spending some money. So just a little thing that works well is, okay, we've got this discretionary amount. You've got 1,000 Rand every month to spend. You've got 1,000 Rand to spend, whatever the amount is that you agree on. And if you want to go and play golf, or go and drink with your friends, or you want to go and get your nails done, or go for coffee with your girlfriends, whatever it is, then you have the freedom to do that without being accountable for every cent. Or in the case of, a couple that I know, he likes to invest in crypto and she likes to save. So instead of putting that money together, he can invest in his crypto and she can save that money. And then there's no conflict about where we're putting our joint finances to grow and to actually have a bit of freedom with what we want to do with it.
Yeah, I like that. It's the old adage of what gets measured, what gets managed. What's it? Peter Drucker. What gets measured gets managed.
What gets managed, yes, gets.
I'm low on sleep today. What gets measured gets managed. That's it. If you don't prepare to fail, if you fail to prepare to fail. That's the other one.
And some people are better at preparing and at managing their finances. For me, budgeting didn't come naturally. It was that I was very averse to it. I've got more of a creative brain. I don't necessarily like being in a structure. So it was quite a big thing to get me to budget and manage my money, because I saw it as being restrictive.
Yeah.
But then when I understood the benefits of that and saw the benefits of that, and then how we were able to manage our money so that we could save more, so that we could invest more, to a point where we actually don't have to worry about money anymore, then you can see the long-term benefits. But when you're 25 or 30 and you're just starting out, you can't see 30 years down the line.
How long did that process take for you to change your mindset and your opinion on that sort of creativity, spontaneity versus plan, organized budget?
I don't think I'm going to answer that question. It took a while. It was a whole mindset change process. And I think being married to an accountant who wanted to account for every 5 cents, it was, you had to budget, and monthly budgeting for me was a nightmare, because you could never balance, you could never account for everything. And so I think it's important for you to find a system that works for you.
Yeah.
For me to take my Pick and Pay account and split it into dog food and groceries and childcare and toiletries didn't work for me. It was too much, and I just couldn't do it that way. But if you put it all together and said, okay, that's household living expenses, it's fine. So
that's what we do. Yeah,
and,
we just
and
lump
that's
everything
fine.
together.
And if you've got someone in the relationship and it's important for them to break that down, and they're prepared to do that, then that's fine. There's usually someone that's better at budgeting than the other person. But I think the main thing is just to know where your money is going.
Yeah.
And something like your food bill is something that people think, I think we spend about so much on our groceries, until you get down to actually working out how much you really spend.
Tell me about it. On
your groceries, especially once you have a family and there's baby food and other things that come into it. So it is something that if you're trying to cut your budget, to first look at how much you're spending on your food and your entertainment, eating out. A lot of working couples will say, convenient, let's just eat out, and they think it's only once or twice a month, but when you look at it, often it's a lot more. And if you work out what you're spending on eating out, it's exorbitant. So it's one area that you can cut back on quite easily if you're looking at balancing your budget. Yeah,
so we did that exercise in the process of the transfer of the property or the home that we've just bought. I went through our budget with a bit of a fine-tooth comb to say, okay, look, where are we exactly? And by far our biggest expense was groceries. Let's call it household. And I grossly underestimated how much money we were spending on a monthly basis. We worked out the first month. We took an average over 4 or 5 months. And I thought, okay, that's the first month. Okay, maybe that was just an abnormal month. Then the second month we worked out, and then that was also similar. And then it was like it was within 1,000 rand every month, pretty much the same. And I was like, oh, man, this is unbelievable. But just by having that awareness, we then formulated a plan. So what we did is one check card is the grocery or the household card. Okay. And then nobody spends anything other than on that card. And so we've got a live scorecard, if you will, of where are we with our finances and our budget with respect to our household stuff. And that's helped us a lot. We've done that for 2 months now, and we've managed to save a bit of poodle. But yeah, it's the awareness. It's not unconscious, mindless, wasteful spending, you know. And then it takes a bit of planning. It took a bit of planning for us with respect to food and meals. And okay, how can we get more legs out of the ingredients that we buy? And Lisa's been really good with that. But just having that awareness, and the budget is just such an important place to start. Because if you don't know where all your money is going, it's like, where do you start? You just feel like you're plugging holes everywhere. But you've got to know what's coming in and what's going out.
Yeah, and that's great that you did that. You know, a lot of people just avoid it because it's a sore point, and they would rather have more month at the end of their money and not know where it's going than actually take that action. So it's a good starting point to take that action. And I guess your motivation for that was because you wanted to buy a house. So that's a great thing. And if we can start that process before we go into big expenses like that and start saving more, you know, we'll be able to build up a deposit on the house, for example, and then take off some pressure later on. So the more you do, the younger you are. And I know that when you're young, you don't have the same responsibilities.
Yeah.
But taking that responsibility early and just making those small differences now makes a big difference.
Yeah. Speaking about age, I saw an interesting article the other day. The average first-time homeowner in South Africa, depending on the article that you read, it's 36 or 37 years old. And I mean, that is a tremendous change from 20, 30 years ago. And I think that could be lifestyle factors, definitely. I don't think it's just affordability when you consider the fact that people are having families later now than they used to. So there's less need to settle down. There's more of an emphasis on travel globally as the world becomes more accessible. So people are happier to rent. It's been a lot more affordable to rent over the last couple of decades than it has been to own. So I think there's that as well. But there's no question, it blew my mind. And I did it as just I have a lot of people come into the gym and we chat about a whole variety of different things. But as a point of interest, I said, hey, do you want to take a guess on what the average age of a first-time homeowner in South Africa? Not one person got it. Every single person said it was younger than 36 or 37. And now, me being 36, 35,
you're average now.
I'm
so it's
average.
Okay
It made me feel a bit better because I thought I was behind, you know. And there's also that pressure, you know, buy your first home. So how do you feel about home ownership? And there's obviously good forms of debt and there's bad forms of debt. So how do you feel about taking debt on? And if you can maybe elaborate on what you think about the average age of a first-time homeowner and how that's changed.
I agree with you. I think it is getting more difficult to buy property in South Africa and worldwide, actually. And you're right, all those pointers that you mentioned come into it. People are much more mobile now, so they want to travel and live a bit more before they settle down and get serious. Expectations of what people want in their first home is also different. Whereas we were prepared to buy a small 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom place to get into the property market, now you want to have a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom place in a better suburb. And so it's that, and I don't underplay the impact that social media has on expectations of what people are having. Yeah. So just that whole, the standard is raised. And then just to answer your other question in terms of how to get into the market and how to look at buying your first home, I think it's also important to buy something within your budget. By the time if you start working at 22, 25, by the time you're 35, you have a better income theoretically, so you should be able to afford more house. But people are then wanting to have a bigger house than they need because their friends are living in luxury. And so buying within your means is also important because it's going to put so much pressure on your young family if you don't. So just as a guideline, about 25% of your income should go towards your house.
Okay, is that the bond?
Well, yes. If you are spending more than 25% on your bond, you're probably going to be a little bit out of your comfort zone. Also, I think just taking into consideration the fluctuation of interest rates. And if you're buying a home and the interest rates are 9% and then suddenly they go up to 11%, some people cannot afford that extra 2% payment that it's going to put the pressure on. To spend an extra 500,000, 1,500 Rand a month could actually put you in problems.
Yeah.
So it's always good to overestimate, include that potential fluctuation. So in 5 years' time, if the interest increases by 1.5%, can we still afford this payment? And I know because we made all of those mistakes. We bought a house that was more expensive than we could afford when we bought our first house. We actually first saved up a deposit for a house to put down, and then we blew that on an overseas sports tour. And we did that a couple of times. So we just actually could never save enough to buy a house. And so eventually we just said, well, let's just, everyone says get into the property market instead of renting. So we bit the bullet and did it. It wasn't exactly good timing in our careers. My husband had just started a new business. But when you get desperate, you make a plan. So we did. But I think buying a house within your budget, within your comfort zone, with a bit of margin for those interest rates. And then it's also a good idea to build up a deposit so that when you are buying your house, you can put down a 20% deposit. And it's just going to cut down your interest rates.
Yeah.
I think, also now the bank loans used to be 20 years. They're now very happy to give you a loan for 30 years because the only ones winning on that one is the bank. And so people are saying we can afford more house because we've got more time to pay it off because it's less monthly. So I wouldn't take out a bond or recommend looking at a 30-year bond. Make it 20 years because it's going to make you actually pay that. And then just because the bank tells you can pay it off in 20 years, if you can pay off your loan in 10 years, put a little bit more into it, you are saving a huge amount. And there's little finance calculators you can use to work out to see how that is. So our first home that we bought, we paid off in 5 years and 5 months because we just said we want to get it done. At the time, we had no idea how we would do it because it didn't make financial sense. But we just got focused and got rid of that debt. So those little things, just have a look at and say how important it is. And when you look at how much you're going to save over those 10 years or 15 years of payments, it makes sense to put a little bit more into your bond than just your payments, that your minimum payments that you expect to do.
What about, see, this is where it gets confusing for me, because if let's say I've got 5,000 Rand a month left over, and I have to make a decision to, for example, put that into the bond, or then do I put it into the markets? So then in my mind, I'm running this equation and I'm doing the numbers to be like, okay, if I put an extra 5,000 Rand a month into the bond, this is how much it's going to save me in interest saved in 15 years' time, for example. But then if I put that 5,000 Rand a month into an index tracker, like a world index tracker or an ACWI index tracker, then that money might appreciate. Let's say, for example, it doubles every 5 years. Then you take that lump sum that I've invested in the market and I compare that to the money that I would have saved on interest. That's when it gets confusing for me, because then I don't know what to do. Do I put it into the bond? Do I spend more time in the market? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Very good question, and it's something that a lot of people ask about. So you can overanalyze it, and you can say, well, what interest am I paying? What interest can I get? And, what is your bond interest rate? 10.5% now, I think, as prime. But it could go up, it could go down a little bit in the next 10 or 20 years. You could potentially put that into the S&P 500 and get an average of 10.7% over your 40-year time period. So you can drive yourself crazy and not make any decisions. So I think what would be a good strategy is, depending on how you manage debt and how you handle debt and how you can live with that, my advice would be, first get rid of your debt. Because that peace of mind of living without debt helps you sleep more. And once you've paid off your home loan, then you can put more money and you will have time to actually grow your assets and put more into the markets and invest more without having that responsibility of now having to pay off your house as well. But if you feel like you're missing out, we had great opportunities recently to invest in the stock market at, good sale prices and things. You could split it and put a bit more into your bond and then put a bit into the markets. So you don't have to be rigid, but it also depends on your mindset and your personality and how you are comfortable with debt. For me, it was important to get out of debt. Also bearing in mind that you've got a little one now, you're wanting to start investing in education, and you think nappies are expensive, varsity fees are and school fees, so that those expenses don't go away. And if you get rid of your debt, you have then more freedom to be more flexible with your income.
Okay, all right. That makes sense. It's a measured approach, so maybe half, and then see how we go from there.
I think it's important to agree with your spouse as well on your strategy for that, and you will get different strategies. For us, it was get out of debt. We didn't, everything went into the bond to get rid of that, but at that time we were paying 13%, 14%. So it made sense to pay down this high cost.
One of my pet peeves when people talk about personal budgets, finances, setting yourself up for financial freedom, is this thing called an emergency fund. Because I'm like, where do people think all this money comes from? Like, you want me to pay private tax, based like medical aids, you've got your grocery bills, inflation is going up, you've got rent, or you've got your bond, and maybe you've got your levies, and then you want us to spend some time in the market because, the longer you spend time in the market, the better it is for you. And if you put extra 500 Rand in a month, that's how much it's going to be if it appreciates. But then you must have a tax-free savings account. Then you must have an RA because of the tax benefits of the RA. But you must also have an emergency fund in case something goes wrong that you don't foresee. And I'm just like, where on earth does all of this stuff, where is it supposed to come from? Emergency funds. Is it something that we should have? How much? Maybe we look at a percentage of income. What percentage of income should people look to allocate to an emergency fund?
Okay, and it's interesting to hear that you said it's one of my pet peeves. And I can see that it's just, like you said, there's so many things. Where do you put all of it? And if you see it as steps, not as everything's got to fall into place to start with. It's like, now we're wanting to manage our money. We wanted to get on top of things and to be able to have control of this financial maze. I think it's important to have important to have a emergency fund. It was popularized by Dave Ramsey, who actually said there's 7 steps to financial freedom. And one of the first steps was to have a emergency fund. And just from experience, I've realized the importance of that. Because we all face emergencies in life. Your washing machine blows up, or your pet goes to the vet, or something. And then what happens? If we are living month to month and we are spending our whole income every month, when something like that happens, the only way to pay for it is to go into debt. So you use your credit card and you think next month we'll get out of that. And then the next month is no better, and then you have another emergency, or something else happens where you've got to dive deeper into your credit card. And that's how people get sunk by debt, because it's so easy now to use your credit card for those things. if you have an emergency fund and you use it for only those emergencies, it just avoids that debt cycle. I think it also depends on your risk aversion and your personality. You know, if emergency fund just says like it's a pain for you and it doesn't make sense, then as long as you've got a way of actually dealing with those life emergencies that happen, and a simple way is just by having a bit of a buffer financially. So if you've got, you know, some money invested in the stock market, might not be as liquid as having money sitting in an account that's usable, but you know that you have a buffer. So if something happens, you have a way of actually accessing those funds, and it's not going to sink you, then I think that's okay. But emergency fund is really just it's a peace of mind thing, and I've found often it's the women that like to have that emergency fund. In terms of the amount, when we talk about $1,000, maybe 10,000 Rand or 15,000 Rand, and that just depends on you as well. It depends on your lifestyle and your expenses. You know, if your washing machine blows up, you can buy a second-hand washing machine for 3,000 Rand, or you can buy a brand new one for 15,000 Rand.
Yeah.
So, you know, what are you going to use your emergency fund for, and what's important to you? So it's just, again, going back to your values and how you're choosing to use that. But I don't think I think emergency fund is a good thing.
Yeah.
So once you've got that set up, then you also actually want to start saving 6 months of living expenses.
That's another one, yeah.
So that's kind of the next step, you know. So eventually, in the case of COVID, I don't know how you managed in COVID, but a lot of people really got sunk because people don't have 1 month's worth of living expense if anything happens. So it was a good example for people just to say, okay, we need a bit of a backup. And it takes a lot of discipline to save 6 months of living expenses. But if your income is not consistent, and if you're an entrepreneur and it's not guaranteed, then it's not a bad thing to have a bigger, I guess it's part of your emergency fund, but it's a bigger buffer. And then once that's in place, you can start looking at investing more.
So then, for every action, there's a reaction, right? If I say yes to something, it means I'm saying no to something here. Would you say people should prioritize that emergency fund over then getting money into the market?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. And, you know, if you focus on it, you could probably save that emergency fund in 2 or 3 months. So it's not a big thing. You know, you sell stuff you don't need, you just cut down your costs and your expenses and all your luxuries just for 3 months. It's not forever until you have that emergency fund, because people think, oh, I'm going to save 10,000 Rand. But, you know, you can save easily a few hundred Rand on your grocery bill just by not eating out, or by bulk saving and bulk buying, or by even bulk cooking. You know, not going to the shops every day, but doing a monthly shop, you'll save money. If you, you know, just are intentional about where you buy your food, and maybe eat a little bit more pasta than steak, although you probably disagree with me on that one, being a coach. But, you know, there are ways of looking at that. You can cut out DSTV or some luxuries that you think are essential, but cut it out for 3 months and you'll save 3,000 Rand.
Yes.
You know, there are ways, if you're intentional, of saving large amounts in a short space of time, if you want to really do that. So it's not a lifetime thing. The hassle comes is when you dive into that or dig into that emergency fund, then you've got to build it up again. But it becomes a habit. And you know that, okay, I've got that little safety net there. If anything happens, we're okay. So I think it's a good thing just to have as a lifestyle backup.
What about, let's chat about bad forms of debt. You know, the National Credit Regulator in the third quarter 2024, 18.1 million loan applicants in South Africa, which was, if not an all-time high, close to being an all-time high. South African consumers are feeling the pinch, and they are running out of avenues to pursue to try and square up their debt. And then obviously they're applying for loans to try and get them through a sticky situation because there's no emergency fund. The bad forms of debt, what do we do with that debt?
Okay.
And what where does that fall on the priority list then with respect to emergency fund, time in the market, investing, etc.?
Okay, so there's different kinds of debt, as you said. I think the worst kind is your credit card debt. People that are going to small money loaners, they are paying a huge percentage without realizing how much they're paying at the end of the day. So a little bit of it is knowledge and knowing what you're paying. Because the banks make it so easy to borrow, it's easy just to get a loan, and they reward you by giving you more credit. So you can just get more and more into debt. So I think if you know, firstly, the percentage that you're paying on that debt is a starting point. So if you ask a lot of people if they've got credit card debt or store debt or they've borrowed money, they don't know what interest rate they're paying. Yeah. They just know that they're paying the minimum amount and they can pay that. They can afford to pay that small amount.
In time it's 22%.
Absolutely. So if you realize what you're paying on that debt, there's a little exercise you can do to say, okay, if I just borrow 1,000 Rand, what am I paying, in debt? And if I took the 1,000 Rand and invested it, it's kind of a down a slippery slope or up a, get me out of this spiral. So knowledge is the first thing. Just knowing what debt you have, what interest you're paying on that, when you expect to pay it off. So there is a system of getting out of debt much more quickly. It's called the debt snowball effect, and realizing what your debt is, listing it down first of all, and then getting out of that, especially your high interest rate, like your credit card debt.
So you sit down, you prioritize the interest rates, whichever the highest interest rates are, you settle that first.
That's one way of doing it. What is a sometimes more effective way is saying, list your debts and find your smallest debt. And that's the one you want to get rid of first, because then you make a bit of progress and you can see we can do that. So even if you're paying 15% on one debt and 17 or 20% on another debt, if one is smaller, then pay that smallest one first. It makes sense to pay the highest interest rate, but if you've got a bigger amount on that highest interest rate, it's going to take you longer to pay it off. So there's a bit of a complicated system to prioritize your debts, but the simplest way is just to say, okay, what is my smallest debt? Let me pay that off first, because you see progress with that, and then you can say, okay, I can get rid of this. And the debt snowball method says take 10% of your income, all right? So somehow you've got to figure out that budget so that you can use 10%, cut back, and also knowing that it's not forever. It's sacrifices now so that we can get out of this mess.
Yes.
And have a better life later on. So take 10% of your income. You keep paying the minimum amount for each of your debts. So let's say you've got 3 or 4 debts. You write them all down so that they're in front of you. You can see them, or put them in a spreadsheet if you prefer to do that. Know what interest you're paying on each of them, and then pay the minimum amount so that you don't default on anything and you don't have people coming and repossessing stuff.
Yes.
But pay the minimum amount, then say, okay, we're going to take 10% of our income and pay the smallest debt first. So you pay the minimum amount plus 10% of your income, and you pay that off until it's dead. All right. And then you take that amount that you were paying towards that debt, you put it towards your next debt that you're paying the minimum amount, and you just keep paying that until that second debt is off. And you will save thousands on interest payments just by using that method of getting rid of it. I mean, obviously it depends on how much debt you've got. But it's phenomenal. It's actually mind-blowing how much interest you can save by just being focused on getting rid of that debt. So it also depends on how much debt you're in and how much sleep you're losing over that debt. So if it's something that really worries you and you're paying 23%, you don't want to be saving anything or investing anything or putting even into an emergency fund. I think the focus would be to get rid of that debt. So that because debt has an emotional impact as well as it's a physical thing. It's not just how it's impacting your life financially. It's people lose sleep, they lose relationships, it impacts your intimacy. It has a whole lot of other subconscious effects that you are not only aware, you might not even be aware of. So depending on how bad the debt is. But I think that most people can get out of debt within 18 to 24 months, no matter what their debt is. If they use that method and they just focus. So there's hope. A lot of people say, I'm in so much debt, it doesn't matter, I'm just going to live this way. But you can create a plan to get out of that debt.
Okay. So let's paint a picture. Let's do a case study. Okay. So there's you've got a 30-something-year-old, maybe early 40s. This person is a homeowner. Okay, got a young family. Let's say 1 or 2 children. They've got a car which they're making car repayments on. They have some credit card debt. Okay, they are wanting to spend time in the market and have an interest in the market, and let's say they've got some debit orders with respect to investments, so they might have an RA or they might have a tax-free savings. How does that person go about navigating their financial freedom, and in what order? So person got some credit card debt, got a bond to pay, got a family, got a car payment, and wants to spend time in the market and also accumulate an emergency fund. What's the checklist?
Okay, so I think first of all you've got your emergency fund. Okay, hopefully you've saved that up, and so if anything happens...
There's no emergency fund.
Okay, save an emergency fund. Okay.
Above the credit card payments?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, because if you don't have that emergency fund, you're going to get into more debt, and it's going to be more credit card debt.
Okay.
So save your emergency fund, and maybe it's 5,000 Rand to start with, but you've got a little bit of a buffer. And then get rid of your high credit card debt, your high cost debt.
Okay.
And, you know, if it's a small amount, you can get rid of that quickly. I know that some people have really sunk with credit card debt because they will use one credit card to pay off another credit card because it's so easy to get credit cards.
Yeah, and they try and take advantage of that 55-day interest-free.
Yes, and then what happens is you create a habit and it becomes a lifestyle, and it's so easy just to ignore the problem until you get to a point where you can't ignore it anymore, you know, and it's just, it eats away at your soul. So debt, it's not only a South African problem, it's worldwide.
Yeah.
Excuse me, it's, you know, it's just because it's so easy, and the banks are so willing to loan most people.
Okay, so now this person has buckled down, they've cut back on their DSTV, their doggy food has gone from hills to the spa, dry crumbles. They've saved their 5,000 Rand. Okay, so they've got their little emergency fund that they're not putting into the credit card, right? That's separate, right?
Separate. Put it into an interest-bearing account. So don't just keep it in your no interest daily account. Put it into you should be able to get 5 or 6% on that. So at least it's growing.
All right. So emergency fund box ticked, right? Then credit card debt. So then they look to settle that.
Yes.
Okay. What happens next? So they now got the emergency fund. The credit card's paid off. Now what?
It depends on what your debts are. You know, if you've got a student debt, obviously, sometimes takes. So if you're in your 40s, hopefully you've got rid of your student debt.
No student debt. But what about the debt on the car?
All right. So your high cost car, house is going to take longer to pay off. So you pay off your car first. Your home loan, you can pay off. You've got a 20-year home loan. You can just keep paying that as long as you don't default on those payments until you can afford to put more money into that. But once you've paid off your credit card debt, if you're using the debt snowball method, then you take that amount that you're paying towards your credit card and you put it into your car and you pay off your car.
Okay, got you.
Okay,
Right.
and then you pay off your other debts, depending what they are. So, you know, there is a way as well of never having car debt. So if you start saving first of all, and instead of buying a new or a, you know, demo model car, you buy a cheaper car and you drive that for a few years and you pay what you would have been paying for a new car into a savings account for 2 or 3 years, you'll then have enough to pay your car cash and be out of that car debt cycle. The car dealerships make more money on the finances than they do on selling the cars. So they're very happy for you to take a loan out. And if you work out how much long it's going to take you to buy a car without having to go into debt, it's not impossible. So I think it is quite possible to do that. My son did it as an example. When he started working as an intern, he wanted to buy a new car because now you're suddenly earning an income, and everybody else is now, these young doctors want to drive decent cars. And so it's very difficult to listen to your mom. So I just said, just do this exercise. Use your same car that you're using, drive it for 3 years. Instead of paying 6,500 Rand a month or 7,000 Rand a month for your new car, put that aside, and in 4.5 years you will have enough to buy your next car cash. So you're never in that car debt cycle. You can drive your car longer than 4 years or 5 years. The cars drive 200, 300,000 Ks now, or you can drive your car for 10 years. But just keep that amount that you would be paying to pay off that car into another savings account. Call it your car savings account.
See, that's a mistake that I made. I paid off my car. I increased the payments, the monthly repayments, and I paid it off faster.
Good.
But then I didn't continue putting money aside. So then I went from cruising around in my Ford Figo for a couple of years, enjoying no car repayments, to then having to step up and get a bigger car to accommodate now family. And then I went from having no car installments to then now all of a sudden I've got a car installment that was a lot bigger than what I was used to paying. So in hindsight, what I should have done is probably tried to mitigate some of that by keeping the car installments down, keeping the car installments separate. But what I did is I then put that money into the markets.
Okay. And then that's fine, because you're actually doing something practical, that's going to grow your money, and you're investing it at least. What a lot of people do is just increase their lifestyle. So they put that money, and then, 2 years later you need another car, and you're thinking, well, where did that money go and how are we going to do it? So at least you put it in the markets. Hopefully it worked well for you, and so it's okay. You can see that as an investment towards your new car, and then if you can sell that at, whatever your return on your investment was with that, you can see, okay, now that's, rather than go into debt again for a car.
Okay, so we've got this person, he's now debt-free, paid off his credit card, or emergency fund first, credit card second. He is now taking the money that he was putting in to square up the credit card, and he's accelerating his installments to pay off his vehicle. Okay?
Right.
At this stage, no time spent in the markets, right? Still squashing debt.
Okay.
Is that what you're saying for the time being?
Yeah, I think if you really want to get in the markets, then put a bit into the market. But for some people, getting out of debt is more important. And once you're out of that debt, then you can put all of that money that you were putting towards your debt into the markets. But being a little bit invested in the market, even if it's a little bit, it's setting up a good habit, and it's also helping you to learn about the markets. So that now suddenly you're not going to go and get a financial advisor to invest for you. You actually have the capability of doing it yourself, saving those fees and actually making your money grow better. So it's probably a personal thing.
Yes.
And if you really want to get into the markets and you feel like you're missing out, then start putting a bit into the markets. And if you really incentivize, then find a way of actually earning an extra couple of grand a month that you can put into the markets. But there's no hard and fast rule. You'll get some people that say you must do it in the structure and you must do it here. And I think you've got to find something that works for you. But definitely getting out of debt, of your main debt, your expensive debt, is a priority, because it's costing you so much more. And
What about now bond versus car payments? Do I put more money in my bond, or do I put that money into the car payment and squashing the car firstly?
So because your car payment's smaller, and you need to look at your interest rate as well, what you're doing, I think it makes sense to pay off your car. And if you don't like that car payment, just have a look at your investments and say, okay, we can take a little bit out of that because we put it in and it's grown 18% or 25% or whatever you've managed to do with it. Or just take part of that growth in your investment and say, okay, let's get rid of this car debt. And then know that I'm never going to be in debt for a car again.
Yeah.
Right. So next time you've paid off your car, whatever you were paying towards that car, just put it into I can see your thinking is on the, you're thinking well. You've toying with these ideas. It doesn't make sense to put it into a savings account at 8% if I can get 15% on the market. But it just depends on what your risk profile is and how diligent and disciplined you are with what you do with that.
Yeah.
And you know, if you want to get out of debt quicker, there is something, you know, living debt-free is very freeing. You know,
I can imagine.
And then you can also just take that money that you were paying towards your debt now to invest in the markets, and you can grow that market growth quicker.
Okay, so this person has now accelerated their installments, their car is paid off, and now they are free to increase putting money into their bond as well as spending time in the markets, and now this person's a happy camper.
Until they've got rid of all their debt.
Until they've got rid of all their debt, exactly.
You know, and I think contentment is really something that we need to strive for, and decide how much is enough. You know, when will I be happy?
Yes.
You know, so when I pay off my credit card debt, I'll be happy. No, because now I've still got my student loan debt, I've still got my car debt. So you're always thinking, when I can pay a little bit, when I earn a bit more, when I can get rid of that debt, then it'll be better. But you get to that point and you realize, actually, I'm still not happy. Because your neighbors now upgraded their car and your friends are going on an overseas holiday. So
social media kills that.
Absolutely. And it's terrifying for the young people now as well. But I think learning to be content with what you have. Gratitude is a huge thing. You know, and you might be struggling now to pay for your toddler and looking at all the expenses coming at you, but you have way more than a lot of other people. And so looking at what you have now and being content with what you've got is just going to give you so much more years of happiness.
Yeah.
Instead of comparing yourself to everybody else and never being happy. And, you know, you can grow your lifestyle. Once you've got rid of your debt and you've paid off your car and you've paid off your home, you know, you don't want to go and just get a more expensive car and a bigger home if it's going to put you into that debt. So learn to be content with your house that you have. Look at what you have got and be grateful for that. And I think that's where a lot of people lose out so much on life, because they think when I'm retired, then everything's going to come right. Because then I'm not going to be, you know, worrying about money. I've put money aside for my retirement, then I can do what I want to do. But most retirees are not content. They're not happy.
Yeah.
Because you work all your life to retire and you've got no purpose. You know, so I think the key is to be happy, be grateful for what you have now, because you don't want to waste all of these years.
Exactly.
And living within your means, you know, just spending less than you earn is a huge thing to help you in your whole financial journey.
Yeah, and it comes full circle to then having that self-awareness of knowing exactly how much are you spending. We all know how much we earn, unless you're sole proprietor, and the income might vary on a month-to-month basis. But salaried employees in particular, you know exactly how much money is coming in at the end of every month on the 25th. But how many people know exactly how much money is going out and on what? So it's come full circle to how we started this conversation, which was get a budget down, commit yourself to the budget, hold each other accountable if you're in a family unit to that budget, and deciding on what relationship we're going to have with money and where we're going to prioritize it and what type of life do we want to live in terms of allocations, entertainment, savings, etc. And then systematically just go about chipping things off 1 month at a time, settle the debt. If you've got debt, just bloody settle it.
Yes, absolutely. You know? It's killing us. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's a wonderful way to finish, Nikki. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat to you.
Thanks, Linda.
What about if people want to get in touch? You've got wonderful workshops as well that you do. So where can people find you if they're wanting to reach out and have you advise them and educate them in their finances?
Thanks, Clinton, for chatting. And it just makes me so excited when I see young people wanting to get in control with their finances, because it's so easy just to put your head in the sand and not do anything about it. So my heart is really just to help people. I do individual workshops. My company is called So Much More, and the website is somuchmore.co.za. I have online courses, so you can just download it online. I do Zoom workshops and I do in-person workshops. And I work with corporates. So if you've got a company, I've just been working at a company this morning, they've put all of their staff on the workshop because they found that people that are not stressing every month with finances, they are more content at work, they take less leave, they have a better mindset. And so I like working with corporates as well who want to empower and uplift their staff.
Wow, that's very cool.
My social media is Instagram is So Much More Finance. And
Wonderful. I'll attach all those links in the show notes.
Thank you.
But it's been an absolute pleasure to have you, and thank you for enlightening me and taking me on this finance journey.
Oh, thank you, Clint. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting, and all the best with your financial journey, getting out of debt and planning for the future.
I'm looking forward to it. I'm revved up now.
Good. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Thanks, Clint.
Not so fast. It is such a cool feeling when I see that Spotify subscribers number increase on the weekly, when I see the number of people listening to the episodes going up, and it really makes a huge difference. Have you ever done something and you feel so good when you get rewarded by some positive feedback and you really feel like you're making a difference? That's what it means to me, and that's how I feel. And it goes a long way if you like the show, share it and subscribe it. Thank you humbly, and I'll see you next week.